Hello viewers, welcome back to my channel Legal Decipher. In the previous video, we had talked about chapter 23 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. If you have not seen that video, you can go and check it. The link is in the description below. Today, we are going to talk about chapter 24 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. We'll go through the chapter and try to understand how the Criminal Procedure Code is followed and how the criminal codes work. So if you are new here, you can like and subscribe to my channel so you can get the video notifications. So let's get started. Now let's move on to the next section, that is section 320. It talks about compounding of offenses. So what is compounding? We had discussed about this in a previous video that compounding of an offense means to mutually settle it. That means the person who has committed the offense can settle the case with the complainant. Now, there are different persons that has the power under this code to compound an offense with the accused. Now, the section 320 provides different kinds of tables for the offenses that are committed, the section of the Indian Penal Code that is applicable to it, and the persons. It also mentions the persons by whom such offense may be compounded. So if the accused wants to compound the case, then these are the persons that are mentioned in this table that the accused will have to approach for compounding such offense. Now it says that the offenses punishable under the sections of the Indian Penal Code that are specified in the first two columns of the next table may be compounded by persons mentioned in the third column of that table. So I'm not going to explain all of this. I will simply scroll down slowly and you may pause the video to learn as to what are the offenses that we are talking about, what are the sections of Indian Penal Code that are applicable, and the persons by whom such offenses may be compounded. So these are the offenses and these are the sections that are applicable, and these are the persons that can compound such offense. So you can pause the video and take a good note about it. Here the word dito means the person that is mentioned previous to it. Now let's move on to the next subsection. Subsection 3 says that when an offence is compoundable under this section, then the abatement of such offence or attempt to commit such offence, or where the accused is liable under section 34 or 149 of the Indian Penal Code, may also be compounded in the like manner. So any offence that is compoundable, the abatement or attempt to commit such offence is also compoundable in itself. Now where the person who would otherwise be competent to compound an offence under this section is under the age of 18 years, or an idiot or a lunatic, then any person competent to contract on his behalf with the permission of the court may compound such offence. So if the person is a minor or a lunatic or an idiot, then his next friend or his relative with the permission of the court may compound such offence on his behalf. Now when a person who would otherwise be competent to compound an offence under this section is dead, then the legal representative as defined in Code of Civil Procedure may with the consent of the court compound such offence. So in case of a death of a person who could compound an offence, his legal representative with the permission of the court compounds such offence. When the accused has been committed for trial, or when he has been convicted and an appeal is pending, then no composition for the offence shall be allowed without the leave of the court to which he is committed, or before which the appeal is to be heard. So in order to compound a case that has been committed for trial, or there is an appeal lying pending before any higher forum from that case, then in order to compound that case, that person needs to take permission of the court where such case is committed for trial, or where the appeal is pending from such case. So the permission of that court will have to be take prior hand to compound such case. A high court or court of sessions acting in the exercise of its power of revision under section 401 may allow any person to compound any offence which such person is competent to compound under this section. So the high court or court of sessions may exercise its power of revision under section 401 and allow the person to compound any offence if the person is found competent to compound under this section. Now no offence shall be compounded if the accused is by reason of a previous conviction liable either to be enhanced punishment or to a punishment of a different kind. So in both the cases where such accused is to undergo an enhanced punishment or a punishment of a different kind, then in such case the offence cannot be compounded. Now subsection 8 says that the composition of an offence under this section shall have the effect of an acquittal of the accused with whom the offence has been compounded. So if the person who is accused compounds the offence under this section, then that will amount to acquittal of such person regarding that compounded offence. Now no offence shall be compounded except as provided by this section. So this is the only procedure for compounding an offence. There is no other way, and that is written in subsection 9. Now section 321 talks about withdrawal from prosecution. So the public prosecutor or the assistant public prosecutor in charge of a case may, with the consent of the court and at any time before the judgment is pronounced, withdraw from the prosecution of any person either generally or in respect of any one or more offences for which he is tried. So the PP or the APP, as the case may be, may withdraw from any case. Condition precedent are that he will have to take consent of the court and he will have to do so before the judgment is pronounced. And what will be the result of such withdrawal? It says that if it is made before a charge has been framed, then the accused shall be discharged in respect of such offence or offences. Or if it is made after a charge has been framed, then when under this code no charge is required, he shall be acquitted in respect of such offence or offences. So when the charge is not framed, then he will be discharged in respect of such offences. And where the charge is framed, or when under this code no charge is required, then in both of those cases he shall be acquitted of such offence or offences. Now, provided that where such offence was any of these offences, that whether it was against any law relating to the matter to which the executive power of the Union extend, or was investigated by the Delhi Special Police Establishment under Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, or when it was involved the misappropriation or destruction or damage of any property belonging to the central government, or it was committed by a person in the service of a central government while acting or purporting to act in the discharge of his official duty, then in all those cases the prosecutor in charge of the case, if he has not been appointed by the central government, then he shall not, unless been permitted by the central government to do so, move the court for its consent to withdraw from the prosecution, and the court shall, before according consent, direct the prosecutor to produce before it the permission granted by central government to withdraw from such prosecution. So, in these cases that are mentioned in the proviso, that where the offence was of these 4 types, then in these cases the prosecutor in charge cannot withdraw from the prosecution unless he has been so permitted by the central government. And it will also be the duty of the court that before releasing such prosecution or before entertaining such withdrawal of the prosecution, the court will always have to ask the prosecution to produce before it the permission that was granted by central government, that you show me that whether the central government has permitted you to do so, that you are wanting to withdraw yourself from the prosecution. And if the prosecution is able to show such permission of the central government, then only he will be discharged by the court, otherwise not. Now section 322 talks about the procedure in cases which magistrate cannot dispose of. So what are the cases that the magistrate cannot dispose? It says that if in the course of any inquiry of an offence or a trial before a magistrate, the evidence appears to him that warrant a presumption of that he has no jurisdiction to try the case or commit it for trial, or that the case is one which should be tried or committed for trial by some other magistrate in the district, or that the case should be tried by the chief judicial magistrate. So as per the provisions of this section, the magistrate who is not competent to try a case for any of the reasons that are stated in clause A, B and C of subsection 1, then in these cases the magistrate will, with a brief report explaining the nature as to why he could not proceed with that case, he shall stay the proceedings and submit the case before the chief judicial magistrate or to other magistrate that has the jurisdiction to try so. And the magistrate to whom the case is submitted may, if so empowered, either try the case himself or refer it to any other magistrate subordinate to him, or commit the accused for trial. Now section 323 talks about procedure when after commencement of inquiry or trial magistrate finds case should be committed. So if in any inquiry into an offence or a trial before a magistrate, it appears to him at any stage of the proceedings before he has signed the judgment of that case, so it shall be done during the proceedings and not after signing the judgment. Now if it appears to the magistrate that this case should be tried by the court of sessions, then he shall commit it to that court, and the provisions of chapter 18 shall apply to the commitment. So now section 324 talks about trial of persons previously convicted of offences against coinage, stamp law or property. So this section talks about the trial of a person who was in a previous case convicted of any offence that relates to coins, stamp laws or properties. Then in that case, where the person has previously convicted an offence that is punishable under chapter 12 or chapter 17 of the Indian Penal Code and was imprisoned for a term of 3 years or upwards, then if he is again found accused of any offence punishable either of those chapters for a term of 3 years or upwards, then the magistrate before whom such case is pending, if he is satisfied that there is ground for presuming that such person has committed the offence, then that accused will be sent for trial to the chief judicial magistrate, or he may also be committed to the Court of Sessions unless the magistrate is competent to try the case and is of the opinion that he can himself pass an adequate sentence if the accused is convicted. Now, when any person is sent for trial to the Chief Judicial Magistrate or committed to the Court of Sessions, then any other person who is jointly accused with him in the same inquiry or trial shall be similarly sent for commitment unless the magistrate discharges such other person under section 239 or 245. Now section 325 talks about procedure when magistrate cannot pass sentence sufficiently severe. So whenever a magistrate is of the opinion that after hearing the evidence of the prosecution and the accused is found guilty and that he ought to receive a punishment different in kind from or more severe than that which such magistrate is empowered to inflict. So the person is found guilty and he is found guilty of such an offence that will inflict a punishment of a different kind or a more severe kind which such magistrate is not empowered to inflict. Or if the magistrate of the second class is of the opinion that the accused ought to be required to execute a bond under section 106, then he may record the opinion and submit his proceedings and forward the accused to the Chief Judicial Magistrate to whom he is subordinate. So in both the cases, when a magistrate finds out that he cannot inflict a punishment that is of a different kind or a more severe kind, the magistrate will record the opinion and submit his proceedings and forward the accused to the Chief Judicial Magistrate to whom he is subordinate. Now when more accused than one are being tried together and the magistrate considers it necessary to proceed under subsection 1, then in regard to any of such accused, he shall forward all the accused who are in his opinion guilty to the Chief Judicial Magistrate. Now the Chief Judicial Magistrate to whom the proceedings are submitted may examine the parties, recall the witnesses and examine them again who has already given evidence in the case, and may call for and take any further evidence that is necessary, and shall pass such judgment, sentence or order as is according to law. Now let's move on to section 326 that talks about conviction or commitment on evidence partly recorded by one magistrate and partly by another. So whenever any judge or magistrate, after having heard and recorded the whole or any part of the evidence of any inquiry or trial, ceases to exercise jurisdiction therein and is succeeded by another judge or magistrate who has and who exercises such jurisdiction. So what happens is that if, say for example, a trial or inquiry is held and a judge or magistrate who is empowered to record the evidence has recorded whole or any part of the evidence, and then subsequently he ceases to exercise his jurisdiction, and thereafter he is succeeded by another judge or magistrate who has such jurisdiction to exercise and who actually exercise such jurisdiction, then the judge or magistrate who so succeeded may act on the evidence so recorded by his predecessor. So the procedure that was performed by his predecessor judge or magistrate will not go in vain. That will be forming up to that part of the record, and after that the magistrate or judge who succeeded will carry out the rest of the process. Now provided that if the succeeding judge or magistrate is of the opinion that further examination of any witness who has already, his examination has already been recorded, and subsequently the succeeding judge or magistrate finds out or is of the opinion that further examination of such witness is needed, then he will re-summon that witness and take further chief, cross or re-examination, and then he can discharge that witness. Now when a case is transferred under this provision of this code from one judge to another judge or from one magistrate to another magistrate, then the former shall be deemed to cease to exercise jurisdiction therein. So once the transfer is done, the former judge or magistrate who was exercising his jurisdiction, it will be deemed that his exercise of jurisdiction has ceased and to be succeeded by the letter. Now the letter has succeeded within the meaning of subsection 1. Now nothing in this section applies to summary trials or to cases in which proceedings have been stayed under section 322. So this section will not apply to summary trials or to cases where the proceeding has been stayed or in which proceedings have been submitted to a superior magistrate under section 325. So all these three cases, this section will not be applicable. Now let's move on to the last section, that is section 327, which says court to be open. So the place in which any criminal court is held for the purpose of inquiring into or trying any offence shall be deemed to be an open court, to which the public may generally have access, so far as the same can conveniently contain them. So the court will always be an open court that will try a criminal matter, provided that presiding judge or magistrate may order at any stage of the inquiry that in any particular case or trial, the public who is generally present in the court or for any particular person among such general public shall not have access to or cannot remain in the room or building that is used by the court. So the court has the power to exclude any person from presenting himself before the court if the court thinks fit that such person shall not have access to or shall not remain in such room or building that is used by the court. So the court may restrict such persons. Now, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, the inquiry or trial of an offence of rape under these sections shall be conducted in camera. Now, we have already understood what an in camera trial is in the previous video, that the court may limit the number of persons as he thinks fit. Now, provided that the presiding judge may, if he thinks fit or on application made by either of the parties, allow any particular person to have access to or remain in the room or building that is used by the court. So any particular person can remain or have access to the room or building that is used by that court if the presiding judge thinks fit, or if any party to that trial has applied through an application before such court, that the court let that person to remain or have access to the building or court where the court is situated or holding its trial. Now, providing further that in camera trial shall be conducted as far as practicable by a woman judge or magistrate. So the in camera trial will be conducted by a woman judge or a magistrate as far as practicable. Now, where any proceedings are held under subsection 2, it shall not be lawful for any person to print or publish any matter in relation to any such proceedings except with the previous permission of the court. So where any proceeding is held under subsection 2, that is an in camera trial, then it shall not be lawful for any person to print or publish any matter in relation to that proceedings except with the previous permission of the court. So if anyone wants to publish that matter, he will be prohibited by all means, and he will only be permitted if the permission of the court is granted previous to such publication. Now, provided that the ban on printing or publication of trial or proceedings in relation to offence of rape may be lifted subject to maintaining confidentiality of the name and address of the parties. So as long as the publication or printing is discreet in relation to the name and address of the parties, so as long as they do not publish the name and address of the parties, then they will be not banned as to report or print or publish about the subject matter. So that's all in this video. If you like my videos, then don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.